Hey everyone, Anark here, and this is another Anark live stream. I appreciate y'all who are showing up early, but I suspect most of you who are hearing me talk right now are watching on the recording of the live stream. On any occasion, as y'all are familiar with, I am going to spend a few minutes getting everything together. I'm going to spread the link around so people are aware this is even happening. Seems like a good idea, in my opinion. Well, here I am listening to my own live stream on accident. There we go. And put it in all the right places. Place number 1. Place number 2. There we go. Put it in a few different places. Hey, there we go. We got the first people showing up. How y'all doing? I got a new video capture card. I don't know if y'all can tell the difference. There we go. Okay, should be all set up. Got the stuff in the right places, I believe. I think we're good. So how's everybody doing today? Yeah, as far as channel update goes, I am almost finished with a video I've recorded about absurdist existentialism. I am in the process of completing the manuscript with PM Press. The completed manuscript has now been turned in, so we're working on a bunch of associated things like creating the cover and so on. So that is in process. The complete manuscript of Modern Anarchism won't be released until late next year, however. So if you want a copy of the single parts, you can still get in contact with me. However, I am out of copies of part 4. So those are being shipped to me right now. So if you want to wait and get all 4 copies, feel free to reach out to me then. I'll obviously make you all aware when I have all 4 copies ready to go. As far as Cooperation Tulsa goes, we actually just got electricity hooked up on the land, which is actually a huge move forward. Having electricity is something we've needed for a long time, and finally having it, big deal. I'm trying to get some of the light off of my glasses here. Wow, just really pretty bad. So yeah, as we are here at the beginning of the stream, just want to remind people, if you want to support the channel, you should go over to my Patreon, become a patron for any amount. It's especially important now as the channel has not been seeing that much growth lately. All of you who are patrons, I appreciate you enormously. And all of you who are considering becoming patrons, please do. Right now, this is my primary source of income, and this has been a poor month or two for these last couple months. So if you want to help me have more time to work on the channel, to work on these videos, as well as to work on the longer video essays, please go over to my Patreon, become a patron. Or if you like, you can do it through the YouTube channel. I think down below, if you're already subscribed, you instead of saying subscribe, it'll say like join. That's basically an integrated YouTube version of Patreon. Also, if you want to help a workers cooperative, a workers media cooperative, you should go over to Means TV and use my affiliate code to become a member of Means TV. If you use my affiliate code, I get a cut of your subscription fee, but if you don't use your affiliate code, then I won't get a cut. I'll get a smaller total cut of the profits of the organization. But if you use my affiliate code, I will get a direct cut of the amount you subscribe for. And I get the largest cut if you like subscribe for an entire year at one time. So, yep. Affiliate code, once again, is Anark. So there you go. All that's down in the description anyway, so. Yeah, Cooperation Tulsa is moving into the electricity age. Now that's advancement. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so, yeah, somebody has donated to allow us to hook up the electricity out at our land, which we call Flat Rock. So we now have access to electricity, and that's huge. That allows us to develop electrical infrastructure. For example, if we had lights out there, they had to be like flashlights or phone flashlights. There were some, there's like a lantern that we have and stuff, but electricity allows us to set up permanent lighting out on the land. And that is huge, honestly. That would allow us to work past sunset, which is usually when we stop working on our work days. So, yeah. Enormous advancement forward. I just want to thank the people who are associated with the Forum for Real Economic Emancipation, which is here in town. Several members of Free donated to get our electricity hooked up. We're currently hosting a person named Fern out there. She's staying on the land, in lieu of staying on the street. So we're essentially giving a houseless person a place to stay during the cold. And getting electricity is hooked up is pretty important because that is what allows us to get heat out there as well. And heat is not only important for her, it's important for the organization as well. It allows us to work through the winter without, freezing and having to get in our cars and sit there in the heat when we get too cold, when we get too bone chilled. So yeah, no, it's a huge step forward. This is something we've needed since we got the land. It has just been too expensive until the kind donors with Free. Also, if you're interested, if you live here in Tulsa, or if you live in OKC and want to drive down, or you live here in Oklahoma, this evening there will be a session of Free, the Forum for Real Economic Emancipation. They will be having a lecture about food and food sovereignty. So if that interests you, you should come by. That is what the lecture will be about this evening. And I'll be there. And so if you want to meet me, you can meet me at the meeting of Free. Sam's Teacup. I'm kind of new to your channel, only watched one video. What do you mean by us? I am not sure which sentence you're referring to there. Not sure what sentence that refers to, where I used the word us. Probably talking about Cooperation Tulsa, I assume. Cooperation Tulsa is an organization that I founded in 2020 during the George Floyd protests. And Cooperation Tulsa is devoted to prefiguring an alternative power structures. That is the goal of Cooperation Tulsa, is to create horizontal structures which are within people's localities, which empower them to make decisions and carry out those decisions within their lives. One thing we're focusing on right now is developing a plot of 2.5 acres of land, which we call Flat Rock, where we are hoping to develop food sovereignty as well as workers' cooperatives, a food forest, all kinds of other things. We've been making big progress on all that. Long Defiant now has been a member for 24 months, and I appreciate you enormously. He says, congrats on all the progress with Cooperation Tulsa. Keep up the great work. We need it. Smitty BLT says, hey, a first live stream. Well, I appreciate you being here. You got the black and red, so you're in the right place. Consistency Master says, hello, I'm watching from India. What's your take on India's left movement, which is primarily Maoist? I'll just openly admit, I don't know enough about India to weigh in on the movement as a whole, but I am familiar with Kerala's People's Planning Committees, I think is what they're called. Kerala People's Planning Committee, is that what it's called? Kerala People's Planning in Kerala. Yeah, I am familiar with that, and that seems pretty cool. But that is really the extent of my knowledge. I know something about India's anarchist movement in the early 1900s, but I won't consider myself to be deeply knowledgeable about India's current conditions. Oh, there we go. We got the canvas. Sean, appreciate you being here, buddy. Been watching all your videos lately, especially the anarchist FAQ videos, which I know that channel hasn't gotten very big, but I am one of your devoted watchers. I listen to those while I'm driving and cooking dinner and so on, and I'm really constantly reminded of how good the anarchist FAQ actually is. People should definitely read the anarchist FAQ if they're just trying to learn about anarchism. Also, if you just need a good toilet reader, you know, one of these big, thick books that you just keep in front of your toilet while people are using the restroom, I imagine that would make a great toilet book. You know, you just open up to some particular question in the FAQ and learn about anarchism in the process. And they do sell a physical copy of the anarchist FAQ. It's pretty hefty, if I recall correctly. Yeah, everybody should go subscribe to The Canvas. He's actually probably one of the biggest anarchist creators on YouTube, but doesn't really identify as anarchist for the most part during the videos. And I suspect that's part of why that the channel has grown so quickly. You know, the more overt you are about your connection to anarchism, I think that it prevents you from growing quite as fast. But no, it's great. Y'all should go over there. It's all about art history, really about art in general. And he has so many good videos. Infernal666H says, Anark is a labor note system that is a labor note system. I assume you just mean, is a labor note system a good transition period to communism? I think that it's like better than nothing. You know, insofar as that if it were instituted, I would definitely prefer it over a capitalist system. But I do think that it has its own problems. It's going to fall victim to all the problems that any system with any form of currency is going to fall victim to. I think it's better than most other systems that have currency because at least that currency is attached to some, you know, concrete material value like labor. But I think you're still going to see problems based in quantizing the value of labor, quantizing how the economy functions. I think you're also going to see problems, of course, in some inequality of accumulation. However, I do know that there are some labor note systems where the labor notes just expire over time, but I think that will lead to other problems, which is to say that, you know, saving is not necessarily always a bad thing. You know, saving is sometimes just preparing for unknown eventualities. So I don't think it's bad that people save their labor notes, but one of the only solutions to a labor note system having a problem with accumulation is to have them expire. And then if they expire, then you have a problem with people accumulating enough to be safe in downturns. So it's a bit of a challenge, but if it were instituted, I would support it. So let's see here. Greg Iliniak. I bet is how you say that. He says, I'm sure you've talked about this before, but what's your take on Ukraine? Yeah, I mean, I'm not probably going to just speak about it at length, but Ukraine has a right to defend itself from Russian aggression, obviously. Not to simplify the complete picture of what's taking place here. It's not as if the United States has not used Ukraine in order to antagonize Russia. That absolutely is the case. Trying to get Ukraine into NATO obviously is a way to intimidate and pressure Russia, but that doesn't give Russia the right to imperialize Ukraine. So Ukraine definitely has the right to defend itself from Russian aggression. That doesn't mean that I'm a big fan of Ukraine. Ukraine as a nation has a lot of very reactionary tendencies. Right now, the Ukrainian president is basically a dictator, given that they're not holding any elections. And there's definitely a lot of fascists in Ukraine, but there's also a lot of reactionary elements in Russia. There are a ton of fascists in Russia. And the Wagner Group, for example, is connected to an enormous number of noteworthy war crimes and is openly fascist. The Russian government is also a dictatorship, and they have essentially rigged elections. So we're just looking at two pretty terrible states going to war with each other, but of the two of them, Russia is the aggressor. And when you are looking at a fight between two people, the aggressor is the one that you should generally be condemning, and the one who's defending themselves is the one that you should be supporting. Not to say that you support them as people, not to say you support the states that are in the picture, but obviously we should not be supporting imperialist aggression. Same person, Greg, also asked, curious to know your take on China. China is capitalist. I mean, that's pretty much it. China is a capitalist nation. I would say, if we're being generous, it's a social democracy. I think they've done a lot of good things. They spend a lot of money into infrastructure development, into alternative energy. I think that's great. They have a burgeoning scientific community. There was a time when China was kind of known for having shoddy scientific results, but these days they have been improving the quality of their science, and you can see it. It's reflected in the advancement of their technology and then in their infrastructure. I think they have a lot of good social programs. Those social programs are good for the people that live there, but they also lack a lot of social programs we would think should be guaranteed. For example, they have a private healthcare system. They do not guarantee healthcare to their workers. All of their unions are state unions. They don't allow any independent unions. And they're essentially a one-party state. Even though they do have other parties in the government, none of those other parties have any significant power. They are all essentially just forced to follow the lead of the Chinese state party. So I don't really look at it as a model to follow. I see it as being a way to manage capitalism. And I really don't believe that managed capitalism ever transitions into socialism, and especially will never transition into communism. So, yeah, that's my opinion on China, I suppose. Somebody said it's a social democracy without the democracy part, right? Yeah, MKRA says China has more than one party the same way that the U.S. has more than two. Exactly. Pretty much, if you are any of those other parties, nothing is going to happen there. You're never going to get power. Unapologetic Anarchist says, hey, Anark, have you thought about making a video on your critiques of dialectical materialism, or do you think it's necessary? That's something I'm definitely open to. However, it's definitely not on the agenda for the moment. If I were to critique dialectical naturalism, my style of, when I write theory, I try to positively assert my position, and then while asserting my position, I will reference the disagreements I have with other positions. You'll find that is generally the case. The only time you'll find that maybe I don't do that is like in these live stream environments where I'm not like carrying out some, very well structured essay sort of form. And, maybe like you could say otherwise in the state is counter-revolutionary, but I do even in the state it's counter-revolutionary try to offer a positive vision of the theory of the state before I go into critique. So if I were to critique dialectical materialism, I would be doing so while asserting what my position is, and then in the context of asserting my position, I would make my critiques of dialectical materialism. So. Knowledge and Defense says, Anark, can you empathize with burning hatred towards Stalinists, considering they'd still double down on their genocidal history against worker control and innocence generally, then call us counter-revolutionary? Yeah, no, I mean, I absolutely understand. And in fact, I think that when you're looking at people who are like Stalinists, who are these sort of like hardline Marxist-Leninists that agree with everything that the USSR does and believe in quote unquote actually existing socialism, aka capitalism, those people are absolutely a harm to the movement. They are trying to get us to carry out methods that have already demonstrably not produced movement towards socialism. And in fact, every time that these methods have been carried out extensively, they lead to counter-revolutionary behaviors. They lead to the crushing of workers' movements. It's just not an effective method. It's obvious, however, that they are part of our coalitions, whether we like it or not. I think that's one of the most difficult parts about organizing in the modern era, is you're in this position where it's like, you're constantly meeting other leftists, and as an anarchist or a libertarian socialist or a communalist or whatever the hell you want to call yourself, you advocate a horizontal revolution. You advocate the people being empowered. And then you're constantly rubbing shoulders with people who don't really care about the people being empowered. They just want to create a very powerful state that accumulates all of the power and then itself oppresses the bourgeois in the name of the proletariat. And these two positions, even though we're ostensibly in the same, social coalitions, these really have enormous differences in their practice and in the modern day in their end goals. I'm seeing a lot more authoritarian leftists, including social democrats, who really have just given up on the idea of achieving a stateless, classless, moneyless society, of achieving a society where the workers have not only ownership, but control over the means of production. This is like becoming less and less of a priority for a lot of authoritarian leftists. And these authoritarian leftists are instead much more concerned with the development of their dictatorial state, supposedly in order to resist against imperialism. However, we've seen that in practice that they become bodies for imperialism. So it's clearly not even the case that these bodies are very good at dealing with imperialism, because they just become imperialist bodies. It's a deeply damaging sect on the left. And it's very difficult to figure out how you build successful coalitions with these people in them. My position is just that there's an appropriate time and place for everything. I don't think that authoritarian leftists should be in our platform organizations. So, for example, Cooperation Tulsa wouldn't accept people who are authoritarian leftists, but all of us in Cooperation Tulsa are embedding in a bunch of other groups and are part of a bunch of other groups and are helping a bunch of other groups do what they do. And in those groups, you're just naturally going to be around a large diversity of other viewpoints. And so it's important as well that we learn how to get along with authoritarian leftists, even in environments where ostensibly it's kind of a zero-sum game. Like if they get what they want, then we're going to put in place authoritarian structures. And if we get what we want, we're going to put in place democratic structures. And that is going to lead to conflict. However, it's important we learn how to navigate that conflict without turning it into unhealthy conflict, without turning it into wrecking the organization. We have to learn how to manage that displeasure and to be civil and to get along with those people within those appropriate spaces. But authoritarian leftists should not be allowed into our platform organization, into our catalyst organizations, because those are places we should be trying to maintain theoretical and tactical unity and strategic unity at the same time. Because if they get into those organizations, they are going to have completely different desires for how that organization will be structured. They're going to want to put in place systems of representation. They're going to want to put in place systems of centralization and hierarchy, and that does not work out. So understandably, people are extremely upset about Stalinists. I think that in the modern day, that a lot of people who would call themselves Marxist-Leninists are starting to drift away from even being socialists or communists to begin with, like I was saying. So it's kind of a weird thing. Some of them are essentially becoming capitalists because they are so obsessed with justifying why that their regimes always put capitalism in place, that they are essentially just I guess more charitably, I'd say they're becoming social democrats, which social democrats are ultimately in favor of capitalism. So, yeah, I guess I don't know if that rant answered your question. I think it does. Well, thanks for joining us, The Canvas, Sean. Hope you have a good time volunteering. If you're in Montreal, go to the Anarchist bookstore that has a name I cannot pronounce. Insoumise. It's the best you're going to get right there. That was it. Lannemeyer says, can you respond to Vivek Chibber's Doomscroll video appearance? He argued, in my opinion, badly against anarchism, and I think it would be entertaining to see you go through the arguments. Yeah, actually, I just watched that. Was it yesterday? It was either yesterday or the day before yesterday. And yeah, no, I wanted to, or my inclination was to respond to what he was saying there. And part of the reason why that I felt the urge to respond, this is not to say that I will, but part of the reason I felt the urge to respond is because it seemed like he was at least making a good faith attempt to critique anarchism. He didn't start out by saying a bunch of, thought terminating cliches. He didn't insult anarchists, but he presented what he thought were good arguments against anarchism. And the arguments were like, logically well structured. That is to say, it's not like they were logically fallacious or anything, which I guess is a step up from most criticism of anarchism. But I think he really failed to understand what the anarchist position was. And this is, once again, I think what they almost all misunderstand. They do not understand the concept of prefiguration. So he talks about in the interview, he seems to be presenting social democracy as if it's the most practical way to make progress towards socialism. But I think that, we're all aware that that's not true. It doesn't work. That we've gotten plenty of attempts at social democracy. Social democracy is one of the most attempted methods for establishing socialism, and not one of them has actually moved towards socialism. I think the only exception I'll make is Chile. And even then, we didn't get to see how Chile really played out in the longer term. So it's just really weird to pretend to be the practical one as a social democrat, when social democracy hasn't shown any promise in carrying out a transformation of conditions, and in fact seems like it backslides over time back into the conditions of capitalism. So yeah, his critiques of anarchism is, anarchism, it seems like, so to summarize, one of the main things he says, anarchists basically want worker cooperatives to make all of the decisions themselves, and therefore what they want is a market. So this is a more charitable understanding of anarchism than a lot of people might have, but it's still wrong. Because for some reason, what they just cannot get through their heads is that anarchism advocates federations and confederations of organizations by which there is a mechanism of planning. And I don't know why somebody as educated as him wouldn't know that, because clearly he's read through a ton of literature. I mean, in that interview, he demonstrates a very extensive knowledge of a bunch of different economic theories. But he's so unfamiliar with anarchism, I don't even think he understands what anarchists are advocating. He mentioned anarcho-syndicalism, but I don't think he understands anarcho-syndicalism. So to make it even more interesting, Vivek mentions Michael Albert and Robin Hahnel in mentioning a bunch of what he considers like viable economic theories. Here's the thing, though. Michael Albert and Robin Hahnel are basically anarchists. Yeah, like sometimes they're even called anarchist economic theorists. Participatory economics, Paracon. This is one of the most anarchist economic systems that has ever been described, and it's just a form of decentral planning. So Vivek, in that process, he contradicts himself. He says that the anarchist economic theory is not feasible, that it doesn't, scale up. And then in the same breath, he mentions Paracon as being a viable economic theory, not understanding that Paracon is basically an anarchist economic theory. Very odd, but I suppose I should just be used to these sorts of blind spots in people's understanding of anarchism. They don't do any active study, so they don't really understand most of these things. I got a donation from Queen Big Dick for $10. I appreciate you. They say, I'm going to be moving to a very small town in maritime Canada with lots of well-established land-owning families, not necessarily rich, just established. Any advice for spreading anarchistic ideas? I would say, in a general sense, it's the same approach you're going to be taking anywhere else. You're trying to create a catalyst organization, a platform organization. You're trying to find your people. You find your people by doing things, by hosting public events, by getting the word out about the event. You should try to be present in a bunch of social spaces, trying to find the people who have your ideas, get with those people, try to form a formal organization, base that organization on a platform which has theoretical and strategic unity, and move forward together. I would say, in a sense, it's actually sometimes very valuable to be around people who own land, because if those people are down with your cause, it's possible they might donate some chunk of that land to your organization, which might allow you to begin building some dual power using that property. So I would say it's not necessarily a downside for there to be those landowning families. Not strictly a downside. I would say there is a downside to that, and that is that people who own land, people who own anything, or rather the more they own, the more likely they are to be like petite bourgeois, you might say. So you're going to be dealing with that. You're going to be dealing with people who have perhaps more petite bourgeois attitudes, but don't just write them off immediately, because in the process, Cooperation Tulsa, in the process of expanding as an organization, we've met numerous people who have owned property, who've been more than willing to donate us property because they're inspired by what we're doing as an organization. So don't make these people into your enemy, but also don't have it in mind that they're your constituency. People who own land are generally not going to be the people you will first approach to organize together, but don't make them your enemies either. Let them tell you whether they're your enemies. And in the meantime, just try to build power for the people. Just try to find your people. That's the main step. I just heard something big fall in the back of the apartment, so I'm going to have to go look at that. I'll be right back. What's that? What's that? Okay, it wasn't a big deal. It was fine. One of my windows like rattles from the wind, and I had a weight up against it, and the weight fell down. I bet one of the cats was involved, but it wasn't clear to me how. So Another donation for $5 from Black Anarchist. He says, Black anarchic radicalism plus Afro-pessimism equals new black consciousness. Interesting. I'm not familiar with that. Yeah, that's interesting. I do have some objections to Afro-pessimism, but I'm still interested to learn more about it. Knowledge and Defense says, why do you think early Marxists leaned towards authoritarianism while even social anarchists were too disorganized? Why has meeting in the middle been such a rare position to reach for both? So when you say authoritarianism, well, I guess I'm not certain that I understand your connection between authoritarianism and organization, because here you're saying they leaned towards authoritarianism, but everybody else was too disorganized, which to me seems to say that you think that authoritarianism is associated with organization. And I don't know if I agree with that characterization. Like, for example, yeah, I mean, in my mind, just coming up with so many different examples that confuse that question for me. So like, authoritarian leftists have enormous problems actually sticking together in a single coalition. They instead seem to splinter and splinter and splinter into a bunch of tiny little organizations who all see themselves as the one true vanguard. So I don't know if it's like necessarily the case that they all like stick together in an organizational coherent sense. I think what you're saying though is like, why is there that early tendency in Marxism toward authoritarianism? And honestly, I think it's probably because the sort of people who are trying to justify authoritarianism are going to tend towards Marxism. I don't know if Marx himself really gives a great foundation for authoritarianism as a method. I do think maybe Engels did, though. Engels was so upset by the events of the First International and by Carlo Caffiero becoming an anarchist that he wrote On Authority to cope, and this ended up being the sort of text for leftist authoritarianism. And I think that may have been a big contributor. The Marxists did not develop a theory of authoritarianism. They essentially developed a etymological critique of the concept of authoritarianism, which left them unable to understand processes such as a concentration of power, power as a general topic. If you refuse to understand the concept of authoritarianism, then you're going to refuse to engage with the concept of power in a meaningful sense. Even if you wanted to engage with the topic of authoritarianism in order to, agree or disagree with it from a Marxist perspective, if you did so, you would have to learn about how power works, and you have to develop a critique of power. And I think that Engels is kind of like vaguely clawing at a power analysis in his work, and it is unsuccessful. He just fails to develop a robust power analysis. It's more like him having the inklings that he needs to address how power works and needs to address the concept of power structures. And he's just doing a very poor job. He's just all over the place. It's extremely scattered. But what it has succeeded in doing is that single essay has acted as a thought-terminating cliche, which has prevented Marxists from questioning the concept of authority, and by proxy to considering the concept of authority and authoritarianism, the Marxists are also being prevented from conceiving of power and how power works and what power structures are and what the general dynamics of power structures are. So I think that probably has something to do with it. And then, of course, I think that, even after On Authority, I think you still had plenty of Marxists who were more libertarian socialist in their bent, even to the degree where people in Lenin's coalition had to critique him for misunderstanding Marx as being very state-oriented. And then in State and Revolution, Lenin is sort of backpedaling on his more authoritarian tendencies because of that. However, it's really after the creation of the USSR that we see that there is like this solidification of the authoritarian tendency in Marxism, where there's very few, I would say there are marginal figures in Marxism that disagree disagree with the more authoritarian bent of Marxism after the USSR. Not to diminish their work, but to say that they're not nearly as prevalent in Marxism after the USSR. £5 from Hazamatrix. He says +1 pint. I appreciate you. I'll take you up on that. I'm gonna go get that this evening. Ty Dust Delu, the original, says, Anark, what do you think of the IWW? I've heard both good and bad things about them. They're great. They're just not very powerful these days. What the IWW really needs is like super committed organizers. They need a lot more people who are going to do that work. We really need people who are going to bravely, courageously go into workplaces, create unions, create solidarity unions, even when all the chips are stacked against us. They need more people who are super motivated toward that end. So if you're interested in forming unions, you want to learn how to form unions, the IWW is great. But IWW is not nearly as powerful as it once was. Knowledge and Defense says, I'm referring to how even Makhno created platformism because they were too loose in Ukraine. Bordiga's criticism against us is that free association inevitably reproduces competition. Thoughts? Well, I've never heard that criticism. That's an interesting criticism. And it's possible that's actually true. It's possible it does create some element of competition, but that's the purpose of confederations. And yeah, one day you might end up with confederations who are in competition with one another. And I would say that's undesirable, but you would hope that those confederations are part of a yet bigger confederation. We would hope to have confederations at the largest level that group all of the smaller confederations together. And I think insofar as that we did that, then that competition wouldn't be nearly as harmful. But I can't disagree with the possibility that there might be some competition. It's just that what we've seen is that in any system, there's going to be some competition. You know, in an authoritarian system, there's competition. In the vanguard, there's competition. They're like all vying for power against each other. There's a bunch of like duplicitous backstabbing and all of that takes place within the hierarchical structure. So the hierarchical structure also encourages competition. If anything, it encourages internal competition, whereas in a horizontal structure, you will get at least internal solidarity, you would hope. So the idea that free association creates competition, I don't know if that's a super strong argument given that hierarchy, which is what Bordiga wants, would also demonstrably create an enormous amount of competition and backstabbing and duplicitous behavior. Sometimes things are just hard. I don't know. You know, everybody, it seems like sometimes people are just looking for like the perfect solution, and sometimes there just isn't a perfect solution. There are just better solutions. And it seems to me that free association will have its problems like every other idea, but that those problems can be mitigated through other factors such as confederation. Another donation from Prod Arcsign for $5. I appreciate you. He says, I'm really struggling with my anarchist identity. Been arguing a lot with egoists, and they're very hostile towards democratic confederalism. Any help? Yeah, I would watch or read part 2 of A Modern Anarchism. I directly engage with egoist anarchism, and I think it will probably provide you with a very good understanding of their theory, very good understanding of yours by contrast, and will hopefully give you some solidity about where an organizational anarchism stands in that debate, and will hopefully also arm you with a bunch of good arguments, because I actually read Stirner, and I read him in 2 different translations as well, and I read numerous works of his in order to understand his position. So I'm kind of doing the work for you in understanding egoism and understanding their perspective. Go read a part 2 of A Modern Anarchism. Long Defiant says, I'm not opposed to anyone living outside of a community. I don't want to restrict their freedom, the freedom to join and the freedom to not join. Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I agree with that in principle. That doesn't mean that it's ideal, right? So there's a difference between being like, yeah, I want that to be a possibility, but that doesn't mean that I think it's good that that were to happen. Ideally, we would want everybody in the same confederation because that allows us to deal with our problems through a recourse to the scales of the federation. Whereas if they're outside of the federation, then we run into complications about people having like, you know, kind of tribal in-group, out-group behavior. We deal with them not being protected by the charter of the federations. We lead to problems with there being, you know, tension between the inside and the outside, and especially if the people that are on the outside end up growing to be a force unto themselves. Once again, it's not necessarily that this will always turn out bad, but this probably is not the ideal scenario. The ideal scenario would be have one worldwide federation that everybody on Earth is in, even if, you know, we accept the possibility and the likelihood that that will not be the case. Imani SJ says, how would dangerous projects and large systems be regulated and work in global anarchy? For example, how would we regulate nuclear power plants to ensure a disaster doesn't happen? Would airports function? Those things would be handled by experts. Those things are going to be put together by experts, and they're going to be regulated by way of the proposals that have been developed at various scales in society. The meltdown of a nuclear power plant affects everybody around it. Therefore, everybody around it would decide the rules and regulations that it had to follow. But then, as far as the construction of that structure, experts would have to decide how that structure needed to be built in order for it to be safe and for it to function properly. So everybody doesn't have to be involved in every single part of the process, but they have to decide the biggest parts. Like, you know, the people in an area might say, we want to build a nuclear power plant. So they put a proposal together that says, we want to build a nuclear power plant. Here's where we want to build it. Here are the broad strokes of it. Next, we want to get a team of experts to come in. They get a team of experts to come in. They amend the proposal in order to abide by the understanding of the experts. Then we delegate the experts to carry out the process of constructing it. We then, if they do something wrong, if we don't like it, we can revoke them from those positions. If we don't think that they should have as much scope to make decisions, then we can change the mandate of their delegation. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's anything structurally difficult about that kind of thing for anarchism, as long as you recognize that anarchism is well structured. If you think of anarchism as being everybody just does what they want, anything goes, there's no rules, then yeah, there's no way that could ever construct a power plant. That couldn't construct anything. That's completely, idealistic conception. But if you understand that anarchism has to be structured, has to be highly organized in order to exist, then you recognize that something like that is not by any means beyond the scope of anarchism. Knowledge and Defense says, is it even possible for them to melt down anymore? Not the new ones, but obviously that requires that you have some expertise, right? You have to have experts that are building it such that they don't, right? AJ Prince says, Anark, I've been feeling more effective at sharing ideas with coworkers recently. I just wanted to say that I really appreciate all the work you've put in and wanted to share the positivity. Well, I appreciate it. That's exactly what I'm aiming for with this channel, hoping to give people a solid understanding of anarchist ideas and libertarian socialist ideas more broadly, such that they are more persuasive and are capable of organizing things. So it's good to hear. Looks like €3 from Jossie Music. I appreciate you, Jossie. No message there, but thank you very much. So following up on that earlier question about nuclear power, Imini NSJ says, how can we ensure that a charismatic group of people don't get delegated for the power plant over a more skilled group of people who are worse at convincing people? I know recalls, but risk remains. I find that very unlikely. Like, when it comes to something like a nuclear power plant, I'm having a hard time imagining that people would choose them to construct a power plant based on them being charismatic rather than having a comprehensive knowledge. I think that most people are going to feel safer with a nuclear power plant when the people demonstrate expertise, not charisma. I think that charismatic people are more likely to be chosen for other sorts of tasks. Charismatic people are more likely to be chosen, for example, to represent the decision of a council to some spoke council, to act as an emissary or a diplomat, in order to develop promotional materials for their projects that they're working on. But I don't think that I don't think that when it comes to like a nuclear power plant that we're at risk of people choosing charismatic people over experts. I mean, like not maybe for that specific problem. I don't think that would be an issue. I don't really personally, you might, if you kind of listen to my stuff and, you listen to me answer questions long enough, you'll notice that I don't really take the problem of the demagogues super seriously. I think that's a problem more for hierarchical structures. In a hierarchical structure, a charismatic person is going to get a lot further because charisma and deception get you really far in a hierarchical structure. Furthermore, in a hierarchical structure, you need somebody, for example, let's say I vote for a representative. That representative has to make all kinds of decisions for me. They can't be an expert at everything. So what I need is for them to signal to me they just agree with my overall opinions. And then I hope that they just find good experts. But when it comes to, for example, if I just needed to figure out who's going to be the one that we delegate to build a nuclear power plant, I don't really think that charismatic people would be selected in for that task. I think that is such a technical task that the charismatic people actually might look less qualified for the very fact that it's charisma they're demonstrating and not expertise. So then it's really upon the experts to demonstrate, no, we actually have the expertise. Here's everything I've learned. Here's everything I know. Here's a complete schematic of the way the power plant is going to be built. Just demonstrate that demonstrate their expertise in the process. I don't think that the demagogue is going to get far in getting delegated in place of experts. I think that could happen in certain positions, but I don't think that building like a nuclear power plant or doing any kind of engineering, I don't think that demagogues are going to fare better than experts in being delegated to technical tasks. Knowledge and Defense says, do you think a growth in automation makes a communist revolution inevitable, or would our rulers keep introducing it as slowly as they do now and always keep new jobs to replace the old ones? Yeah, I don't think that growth in automation makes a revolution of any kind inevitable. I think that they are going to continue to develop it at precisely the pace where it is safe for them to develop it and maintain their grip on power. It may eventually come that technology develops beyond their grasp. However, I don't think that that's going to just like turn into communism. I think that could just turn into a sort of cyberpunk techno dystopia instead. And then you would just have a population of people who are subjugated to carry out a bunch of tasks that we just don't want robots to do and we don't want automation to do. So no, I don't take that for granted. It's just a technology. And like all technologies, it is only able to be judged based on its context and what sort of social fabric that it's embedded in. And stop that. No. Oh my God. No! Stop! Anyway, Immanines says, I understand this, but it is easier to lie about expertise. Since the collective decides, the collective does not have the most ample capability to select who is right for the job. I think representative democracy of some kind for a group whose lives are dedicated just to making certain decisions would be better. No, I mean, representative democracy is more susceptible to the problem you just presented. Representative democracy is precisely the system which is susceptible to demagoguery. So, like, if your problem is demagoguery, then a horizontal system is better than representative democracy. Representative democracy is perhaps the system with one of the biggest flaws towards demagoguery, because you're in a position where you have to elect somebody that does all kinds of different tasks, not just one specific task, but a bunch of different tasks, and has to make decisions about a bunch of different things. So what you become concerned with is them taking on positions and opinions you agree with, not necessarily that they have any form of expertise. I mean, look at the real life examples and tell me that that's not exactly what we see. Like, you know, representative democracy, we have it. And it devolves into demagoguery over and over and over and over and over. Trump is currently the demagogue in the system. Like, representative democracy isn't better at dealing with demagogues. It's worse at dealing with demagogues. You know, like, the average person, if they were just trying to figure out who do I want to build me a nuclear reactor, they wouldn't be like, oh, Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth. They would be delegating experts to build a nuclear reactor. I guarantee if you took a poll of the majority of the public and you asked them, who would you rather build a nuclear reactor, Pete Hegseth or a team of committed nuclear scientists? 90% of people are going to say a team of committed nuclear scientists. The problem is they're not just voting for somebody to carry out a single discrete task. In representative democracy, you're voting for a person who's supposed to represent all of your needs and interests, all of them. And they're supposed to be able to write legislation which represents all of your needs and interests. So you're not really going to be voting then for expertise. You're going to be voting then for ideological agreement. And that is the system that is most susceptible to the problem of the demagogue. Imani then says, my problem isn't demagoguery in general, just that leaving every single decision susceptible to it is scary. With recalls, day-to-day operation would be better than under collective direct democracy. I just don't see how that's true. We already have recalls, and it's not fixing the problem. Once again, the nature of a representative democracy is about you're voting based on whether they have ideological conformity to you, not whether they have expertise. So it's actually more susceptible to the problem of the demagogue, and the demagogues make more decisions. Whereas when you're dealing with a system of direct democracy, it's not really going to be possible for you to vote for charismatic people for everything that gets done. That's just not going to be feasible because there's just not that many charismatic people. And most of the tasks that need to get done need to be done by somebody who has expertise in the matter. And experts aren't usually going to be the most charismatic people. You really just need the task to get done. That's the fact of the matter. I mean, every once in a while, maybe that'll happen. But it's going to be less of a disaster than a representative democracy where it happens every single day. I would say representative democracy, we're essentially ruled by demagogues. So I don't really don't see this critique, to be honest. I think this critique is, I don't know, it just has so many logical inconsistencies. For example, like your assumption that there just is going to be a charismatic person who can be delegated to every position. Like that just doesn't seem like that's something going to happen very often. Furthermore, if you're a charismatic person and that's all you've got to offer, why would you be trying to get delegated to build a nuclear power plant? If you're a charismatic person and that's all you've got to offer, you're going to try to put representative democracy in place so you get to make all of the decisions for everybody. You're going to try to create hierarchy. You're not going to just like want to go do mundane jobs that experts would be doing otherwise. That's not a flaw in a directly democratic system. I don't think that's a reasonable concern with a directly democratic system. Emanine says we can use direct democracy for important decisions, but not for day-to-day operation. For example, if the plant is built, that would be voted on. Who runs the plant? The collective doesn't decide. I think you're like moving in the right direction. I think that's like you maybe starting to kind of understand what the better method, the better approach is. But I would just recommend maybe you just go like learn what anarchist solution to the problems are. Like running the plant should be the workers of the plant and people who have expertise about how the plant is to be run. There doesn't need to be like a person running the plant. I don't think that that's necessary. Hierarchy isn't necessary to run a nuclear power plant. What you need in a nuclear power plant is experts delegated to the tasks, workers committed to carrying out the necessary tasks. Those people together can decide how to run the power plant. So yeah, that's called a mandate and that's called a delegation. So you'd want to delegate people to carry out the necessary day-to-day tasks of working in the power plant afterwards. You know, you would have people who, those experts and the people who can run the power plant, you would delegate them to those tasks. They would have a mandate for the things they're able to do. You know, every day you can check the heat of the cooling pool. Every day you can make sure that the rods, the control rods are in functioning order. Every day you can check, and so on and so on and so on. That's the scope of their mandate. That's the scope for which they don't have to check back with the council. So that's the general principle, but I would recommend go watch either After the Revolution if you kind of want a short overview. But if you want like a really rigorous, building the organizational theory from the ground up, go watch part 4 of A Modern Anarchism. John Sean says, I'm curious, why don't anarchists focus on poverty alleviation and raising living standards? One doesn't need to be state leftist to focus on it equally as much as anti-hierarchy. I don't think that they don't not focus on it. They're just trying to do it through direct action. Right? So when anarchists focus on poverty alleviation, they're trying to create structures that allow us to directly deal with poverty. So like, for example, one of the examples you'll find is Food Not Bombs. Food Not Bombs is an attempt to kind of deal with poverty alleviation, but it's dealing with it from the bottom by creating those structures in the here and now that allow us to directly intervene rather than using the state or using capital to do the job for us. I think that is the big difference. The difference between direct action and indirect action. Anarchists are focused on direct action. So we're trying to build the alternative structures. So I'll give an example. Cooperation Tulsa, which is the group that I'm part of, we own some land. We own 2.5 acres. That allows us to not just go out and feed some homeless people. That allows us to say, actually, you can come put a tent on our land. Because we have land, we can directly intervene to help a person who's living on the street have a place to stay that is safe. That's the anarchist approach. The anarchist approach is to say, no, we're not going to use the state as an intermediary. We're not going to beg to charities or beg corporations to do the right thing. We're going to build the structures that allow us to do the right thing, and then we're going to do the right thing. That's called direct action. So it's not that anarchists aren't focused on those things. They're focused on creating power within the people to solve those problems themselves, rather than relying on enormous institutions that have all of the power, that are disconnected from them, and which they don't have any control over. So I think that's a big part of it. I'm watching the replay, the delayed replay of the stream, and I'm seeing Lorenzo in the background trying to just destroy things, just being ridiculous. Now, and then I look back at him, and he just goes, "Murr." The Darwinist says, owning land equals private property. You couldn't help them without private property. That's true to some degree. However, what we're trying to do with that land is redevelop it as a commons. That is to say that the land, essentially, anybody can go on to that land and use it. Obviously, there has to be a process of us interacting and having, a communal decision-making in the process. But the land is actually collectively owned. It's not owned by any one individual. So if it were owned, for example, by just one of us in the organization, that would certainly be private property. If we were to tell people you can't come on the land, that would be private property. If we were to tell people you can't go out there and plant things, you can't use this productive resource, that would be private property. Yeah, but it's none of those things. It's owned collectively by a group of people. It's developed as a commons. It has people both inside and outside of the organization utilizing that commons. So it's actually moving in the opposite direction of private property. Private property is what it was beforehand, which is to say it was owned by a single individual. And when that single individual owned it, only people who that individual said were okay could come on the property legally. Only they could really use that property in order to develop it. Us getting the property and is essentially a process of us collectivizing the property. It's become recommoned, you might say. So it's something you can't do legally. You can't actually redevelop the commons legally. That's not possible. The closest you could get is giving it to the state. And obviously we're not going to give it to the state. That's not a good idea. KD says, suggestions for finding direct action tactics. It's very contextual. You need to look at your circumstance. You need to figure out how power works in your circumstance. And you need to figure out what people are going to be able to be rallied around. So for this, I would recommend reading part 3 of A Modern Anarchism. Constructing the Revolution also might be instructive. The Darwinist says, if it's owned by everyone, then I can go and camp on it and you can't stop me. Exactly. That's what a commons is. Scotty Too Hottie says, serious question. If human nature is not inherently greedy and selfish, then why don't you trust human beings in positions of power? Isn't that an admission that humans can't be trusted with power because of human nature? I don't believe that humans are inherently selfish or greedy, but I also don't believe that they are inherently selfless and cooperative. I believe that humans adapt to their circumstances. I believe that what has allowed humans to get to where they are as a species is that they are insanely adaptive, that they are more adaptive than any other species. And that is down to the fact that we have a brain, a very complex, very advanced brain, which allow us to have a very complex intellect. And that allows us to adapt and to develop all kinds of different ideas and ideologies and to reconceptualize how we approach situations such that we are going to form ourselves to the form of our container. We're like a liquid or a gas in that sense, right? We are going to adapt ourselves to the structure of our container. So if humans are placed in hierarchical power structures, then they are going to act by the imperatives, the incentives and disincentives of the hierarchical power structure, which is greed, selfishness, destructiveness, the externalizing of damage, right? Like if there's some kind of problem, they're going to externalize the risks. That's all in the nature of hierarchical power. So if you're in a hierarchical power structure, those are the imperatives of how to act within a hierarchical power structure, and humans will simply be adapted into that structure to act in a way which is conducive to living a good life or being powerful within that structure. Whereas if you put humans in a horizontal power structure, slowly that horizontal power structure will also begin to form their behaviors and attitudes. It will also create incentives and disincentives to different behaviors. And those incentives and disincentives to different behaviors will make people function in more selfless and cooperative ways. So I don't believe in a conception of human nature that humans are naturally selfless and cooperative. I believe that humans are the utmost adaptive species on the planet, and that cooperation and selflessness are just beneficial for us. That is to say that those are just beneficial qualities for us as a species, and they are what have allowed us to flourish in many difficult situations in the past. And I have a bevy of theoretical reasons to prefer a horizontal system over a hierarchical system. Scotty Too Hottie says, follow-up question. If human nature is malleable, then can't humans be molded into being good people in positions of power since it's malleable? That's the idea that has been taken for many hierarchical structures throughout history. The idea is that you just have to get the right people into positions of power, and those people, especially if you could develop some kind of internal incentives, that hierarchical structure will be filled full of people that are supposed to fill those positions. This is essentially the classical position of people who advocate for hierarchy. They just have all kinds of different ideas about how you can create that hierarchical system such that it will form the people inside of it into the sort of people that are necessary to act good within the hierarchical system, the sort of people who will be competent to act within the hierarchical system, and so on. History has shown that that just doesn't work. And the reason is that power structures are actually what form the incentives and disincentives for behavior. And that's because of how they route power, how they convey information, and how people within that system become limited by their position within the hierarchical system. So it doesn't matter how malleable that human beings are. When I am the tyrannous dictator of an entire nation, there's just no way as a human being with my brain and the limits of my human brain that I can know everything about that nation. I can't know everything about everyone's thoughts in the nation. I can't know everyone's inclinations and desires. I can't know what is harming people. I can't know about all the plots against me. I can't know about all of these things. There's just no way that I could conceivably know all of that. That's a limitation of the human brain. And so what this leads to is filtering of complexity. It leads to simplification. I highly recommend reading a book called Seeing Like a State by James C. Scott if you want to learn more about the concept of simplification and the schematic view, as he calls it. This is an inherent flaw of hierarchical power. Also, hierarchical power, the higher up you go in the hierarchical system, the less accountability there is. So accountability is that mechanism by which perhaps we could disincentivize abuse of power and corruption. But unfortunately, the higher you go in a hierarchical system, the less accountability can be exerted on you, because you now make all of the decisions, or you make more and more decisions depending on how higher up you are. And the more decisions you make, the more capability you have to avoid responsibility. And also the more power you have to be able to prevent the people and the bureaus and so on that are supposed to hold you accountable from holding you accountable. And the more hierarchical the system is, by nature, the less accountable the person in the position of power is. So what that means is it bumps up against the limitations of the human psyche, of the human brain. The human brain may be highly malleable, but it can't know everything all at once. We're not gods. So what the problem is that hierarchy puts limited human beings with limited conceptions of the world and limited ability to understand the complexity of the world into positions where they have to be making decisions for everyone and about the things which are too complex for them to possibly be able to make good decisions about. Whereas a horizontal structure, it sort of recognizes that fact. By situating power locally, by putting power into the hands of the people who are directly experiencing the world, you allow people who have direct experience of the matters and therefore the most complex feed of data about those specifics, you allow them to make decisions about those specifics. And when you want to make larger and larger decisions, you agglomerate the direct experiences of many, many people. Whereas in a hierarchical system, the higher up you go in the system, the more decisions you make, yet the less personal experience you have with all of those features, with all of those things that are being described. So what I'm trying to get at, and hopefully this is being made clear here, is that the power structure itself creates limiting, is itself a limit to the extent of humans acting within it. And it incentivizes and disincentivizes particular behaviors based on the way that it routes power within the world. And this is what you might call a power structure. So why couldn't we delegate people to handle certain sectors? If we have to select one expert per sector with radical democratic structures and codified transparency, this would be best. We can delegate people to handle certain sectors. That's within the structure of anarchism. You follow up by saying, for example, if we were to build and have an airport functioning, it makes sense to democratically delegate one person or group of people to oversee it. Is this what you suggest for pure anarchy? Probably closer to the group of people. But when you say oversee, I think you're imagining command. And when I think oversee, I'm imagining check and regulate. So that is to say, they're going to make sure that everything is functioning in order. And if it's not functioning in order, they would bring it back to the council for the council to change the mandate. But the mandate is set by the totality of the people who are affected, not just the experts don't get to edit their own mandate. They get a mandate and a scope of delegation, and that scope of delegation can be changed at the whim of the people who are affected by their decisions. So I think you might be understanding what's going on here. I think the difference is you're trying to imagine that there's going to be an inherent structure ahead of time where we just have to put like one people or a committee of people into this particular position, and then we just repeat by changing the people that are in that committee or position. That's something that might occur. But in an anarchistic system, that entire committee could be abolished if we wanted to. Let's imagine, for example, we did a committee to oversee the nuclear power plant. But what we find is the power plant functions fine without the committee. The power plant is staffed by experts. The experts all understand how it functions. In fact, they have a better day-to-day understanding of how it functions than the experts do, because the experts don't actually work there. Then that's a perfect example of where we would just get rid of the committee of experts and we just give power over to the people working at the power plant. So I think the key here is that there needs to be flexibility. In anarchism, we have the possibility to create or revoke entire structures. We are not just stuck voting for representatives. Last one you said is, or it mean the collective decides on each and every person working on the airport. They could do it that way if they wanted to, or they could delegate people to get together a crew, and that crew would just function within the scope of a mandate. They develop the scope of the mandate, then they pass it, and the people who are delegated carry out the tasks within the scope of the mandate. So you can, once again, if you want to learn more about this, just go read part 4 of A Modern Anarchism. Vlad says, do you view the world in black and white, or do you think there are shades of gray? If it's the latter, then do you think there can be a middle ground between hierarchical and horizontal power? I think that absolutely. I mean, most systems are not absolutely horizontal nor absolutely hierarchical. That's an extreme rarity to have one or the other. However, if you do not develop mechanisms for horizontality in systems that are built with hierarchy, they're going to tend towards hierarchy, especially when you're in a society where you are surrounded by hierarchy. So hierarchical structures tend to hierarchicalize themselves because the people within the positions of power are motivated to exacerbate their own power within the system, which means that they're going to try to accumulate more flows of power into their hands, which means they are going to centralize more power, which means they are going to exaggerate hierarchy. So, for example, we see the United States, its original formulation, for example, is not absolute hierarchy, right? It's something kind of in between. It's a mixture. We've got something that has hierarchical elements, and we've got something that has, some ostensibly horizontal elements working in the opposite direction. For example, the fact that people vote, that's a horizontal element. It doesn't mean that the system is horizontal, but I think more like it's on a graded spectrum, right? Absolute hierarchy, that's monarchy, that's dictatorship or tyranny, you might say. And on the opposite end, horizontality, that's like pure direct democracy, right? That's like everybody is involved in making every decision. And so when you look at the American representative system, or when you look at representative democracy in a general sense, what you see is something that's not like an absolute monarchy. So it's not like absolutely like a perfect hierarchical power structure. It's not absolutely authoritarian, as I would say in my parlance. It is kind of like got a mixture of some, accounting factors, right? You've got like the hierarchical elements of representation, and then you've got the horizontal elements of voting for those representatives. However, you'll notice over time, this system, because it is built with those hierarchies in place, and because it didn't have a sufficient amount of horizontal structure, that means that it has tended towards hierarchicalization. So in order for a system to do the opposite, to move in the direction of horizontality, it has to be built with anti-hierarchicalization within it. So it has to be built to perpetuate horizontality, and for its accountability to be towards people and structures which could exacerbate hierarchical power. So most systems are graded on this spectrum somewhere, where they're not fully authoritarian, they're not fully libertarian. They're kind of like some mixture of the two. Most authoritarian systems we've ever seen are absolute monarchies. So the most horizontal systems we've ever seen are, things like the Zapatistas, things like the Iroquois Confederacy, things like the CNT-FAI in the countrysides. These are horizontal systems, and they maintained horizontality precisely because they are built to work against hierarchicalizing impulses. Vlad says, in my opinion, you can have a decentralized hierarchical society. It existed in the past in feudal Japan, India before British rule. Agreed, yeah. But I would just say what that is a bunch of hierarchies, right? So what you've done is you've fractured society into a bunch of pieces, into a bunch of power structures. Each of those is a centralized entity. But you're right to say if you were to put a circle around that nation, a bunch of those entities, you would see that you have a bunch of hierarchies competing against one another. But that wouldn't be an absolute monarchy, right? It's kind of like precisely what I'm saying here. And then, if you look at capitalism, it's a decentralized but hierarchical structure. So you'll notice that I don't say that authoritarianism equals decentralization. So authoritarianism is really just the tendency towards that combination. But you can have a bunch of authoritarian structures. But once again, I would then say that the power structure of society is no longer unified but fractured. Right. So now you have a bunch of power structures, each of which are highly authoritarian, in which case those are each very centralized. If you were to then join them together, say, because you gave the example of feudalism, if you were to join them together into an absolute monarchy, especially like what happens in the Warring States periods, then you'll see that that is unifying all of those hierarchical power structures into a greater hierarchical power structure now. So anarchists are advocating that we essentially create an enormous number of horizontal power structures, all of these horizontal power structures organized together into federations of horizontal power structures. Wow, $50 from Ceylon. I appreciate you so much for that. He says, hey, Anark, what are the potential weaknesses or flaws of a horizontal community? One of the things I worry about is the possibility of hierarchy creeping back in to undermine the entire project. Or are there other areas of concern? That's a real concern. Every system has flaws, and a horizontal structure requires that we maintain the horizontal structure. It is not enough to just put it in place. We have to continually return to the process of cultivating the sorts of people who will occupy that structure. We also have to continually return to maintaining that structure. We have to stop those structures from becoming hierarchical. We have to stop people who want them to become hierarchical from forming them into hierarchical structures. Because unfortunately, that is something that can be done, unless we put in our charter, of course, that it cannot be done, which may actually be a good idea, to be honest. I've advocated as much. But you're right to say that there is this possibility of horizontal structures hierarchicalizing. In fact, this is something we've seen like numerous times. I think the Russian Revolution is a great example of this. The Soviets, right after the October Revolution, that was an incredibly horizontal system. And really up for the first few months, it was developing into becoming a more and more horizontal, a large scale horizontal system, right? But then there was this, I'll say this, they voted yes on Lenin's draft decree to reduce horizontality and to create hierarchy. Now, they thought it was temporary, to be fair. They thought that this was war communism, and that once the war was over, they were going to go back to the way it was. But they voted for it. So this is something we have to cultivate a mentality within the people who occupy these horizontal structures, that they must be part and parcel to the process of safeguarding the horizontality of those structures. In the video after the revolution, I kind of present horizontal power structures as being like an immune system against the rising of hierarchical power. I think that hierarchical power is kind of like a virus. It's like a sickness almost. And the body of society has to be built such that it resists that sickness. That sickness can seep into everything. And that's because there's a lot of reasons. Number one, hierarchy can feel expedient. It can take effort, and it can take mental exhaustion off of the shoulders of people who are making decisions. They want to make less decisions. They'd rather someone else do it. That's one thing that can happen. Another thing is they can be told that this is absolutely necessary for some purpose, like some coordinative purpose. There's a variety of ways in which hierarchy. Oh, also hierarchy can just arise through subjugation and domination, right? Can just through a person just doing it through force. We have a lot of historical examples of that. Well, you have to build a society that is like an immune system against that. In my mind, a horizontal society, by its nature, is more of an immune system against that than having nothing. I think that having nothing, the sickness just takes over. It's like not having an immune system. You're just going to get sick. The viruses are going to rack your body and destroy you. But a horizontal system, the better it's built, the more that it is immune. It is an immune system against the development of this hierarchical sickness that arises. So this is what I talk about in After the Revolution. If you want to go watch the video, this is, I think, one of the first things I discuss in the video. So, yeah, so what are the risks? I mean, like, One of the weaknesses is that a horizontal society can only function if you have cultivated solidarity. That is to say, people have to have some conception that they're in it together. They have to have some conception that they are, I don't know, comrades or whatever, right? If they develop a bunch of cliques that are competing and that have all kinds of nefarious motives and that don't want the best for the collective, that can slowly break down through free disassociation into smaller and smaller groups, which become less and less effective. And also this reduces sociality, which then can lead to breakdown and degradation. So this is part of the reason why I'm not an individualist anarchist, and I don't think that can work. The only way that this can work is through a communal ethic, is through a collective conception. We have to have a shared vision. We have to have shared bodies for decision making. We have to recognize that whether we like people or not, we need to be able to make decisions along with them. We need to be able to come to conclusions together. We need to be able to amend our proposals together. Even if we don't like this person, it's not, these bodies of a future society that are being discussed, these aren't just bodies comprised of people who like each other. These are bodies which have committed themselves to the civil management of society. And the civil management of society that is bigger than any one individual, it's bigger than a clique, it's bigger than your competition with another person. This is how we all have to come together to make decisions that benefit all of us. So I think that all of this together has to be part of our conception about how we build a future society. And this is why I'm a social anarchist. Spider-Man says, I think that when it comes to power, getting things done in a quick, efficient, and decisive manner and democracy with checks on power are inherently at odds with each other. You can't have both. I definitely think that you're right to say that there are some countervailing values here. In a democratic system, a system where we all come together to make decisions, that's certainly a system which values being able to make slow decisions. Right? Being able to slow things down, being able to delay, that's definitely something that's valuable in a horizontal system. I don't disagree with that. But I do want to disagree with the idea that horizontal systems can't make quick decisions. They absolutely can. In fact, Cooperation Tulsa, lately, we've been making a series of decisions and we've been making all of them in under 24 hours. Like, there's been barely any delay. Every decision that we've been making has been going very fast. We deliberate, we propose, we amend, we decide. And so you can make decisions very fast. What makes the difference, in my experience, between whether a horizontal structure can make decisions faster or needs to slow down is really just how well developed is our consensus? Like, do we have agreement on the topic? If we do, we can make a decision super fast. It can be done in like 5 minutes. But if there is something that needs to be deliberated, if there are disagreements, yes, we will have to slow down and work through those disagreements and figure out amendments in order to square all of those needs. However, in my experience, this can still be done in the course of just a few days for all the things Cooperation Tulsa has ever dealt with. Every once in a while, maybe something gets strung out into being decided over the course of a week or something. The only things I can think of that have ever taken longer than a few days to decide for Cooperation Tulsa are the development of our logo and all of that. Okay, like our colors and our logo and all of that. That took forever. That took like a month or something. And then the redevelopments and updates of our charter. Those take a long time. But that's good. We want those to take a long time. We don't want those decisions to be made fast. But like, for example, we needed to get our electricity hooked up. Like, this is something that we just did. We got our electricity hooked up on a parcel of land that we've recommened. And they just delegated me to do it. I was already talking with the people who were going to donate us money. And so they delegated me to do it. The decision to take the money and to spend it took like a few hours, like 4 hours or something. It was like, a decision just made asynchronously. And I then carried it out in an expeditious fashion. You know, the whole council doesn't have to be on the phone when we call the electric company. You know, the delegation is for this purpose. So delegation is how we get things done fast. We determine a scope of decisions or, you know, a scope of actions that can be carried out without checking back with the council. And people can just do those without any request back to the council. So I think one of the things that everybody seems to get mistaken about this concept of horizontality is that literally everything, every single person in the entire thing has to be present and checking every single decision. Like, you know, we go to a party, like I did the animation sketch with Seriously Wrong. You know, like we go to a party, like we need to delegate somebody to cut the cake, that we need to delegate somebody to help somebody's wound, you know, like that's not necessary. That's not necessary. Those people have been delegated more broadly to do the tasks. We delegate people as necessary to do either tasks that need to be done one time and we don't need to check all of the details. We just have a mandate with a scope, or check tasks that have to be recurring, tasks that keep getting done over and over. For example, we've delegated somebody to be our social media. We've delegated somebody to do our education programs. We've delegated. Those people don't have to check back for every button they click on the internet. Those people don't have to be like, am I allowed to close this tab on my browser? Right? Like they have the scope of a mandate and those things just get done. Like this is how you deal with getting things done fast. It's called delegation. Hypnosis asks, how often do you rotate? We rotate as necessary. There was a period of time where we were trying to put limits for rotation on every position. The truth is that most people don't want to keep positions permanently. You want to rotate. Like there comes a point where you're just like, I've done this so long. I'm exhausted by this. I need to just hand it off to somebody else. So we found that rotation just kind of happens naturally, honestly. Like when I think that rotation is mostly necessary, or rather, I'm not going to say it's not like a good thing to have in general, but rotation, because there are reasons to want rotation, regardless of what I'm about to say. But rotation is mostly an accountability process that is necessary in representative systems, because you want to make sure that because people want to maintain positions in representation because they are given a very broad scope to make decisions and to command other people to do what they want. And so then you want rotation for accountability, to make sure that that person doesn't just accumulate and keep power for too long. Rotation, however, does have value in a horizontal structure in delegation because you want people to learn how to do all of the tasks of the organization. You're trying to not silo knowledge. You're trying to get people to know how to do everything and to be kind of Renaissance people of a sort so that they know how every tasks work. And that also means they can make good decisions about developing new mandates and developing, you know, basically new rules and regulations on how delegates will function in the future. So, yeah. So yeah, we just rotate as needed, just like Billy the Shid says. You know, if people just kind of get tired of the position, well, they make clear, they're like, I don't know if I have the bandwidth for this. I really need somebody to take it off my hands. That just happened recently with one of our big tasks. So our popular education group was being run for well over a year, maybe 2 years, by one of our members named Theo. Well, now it's being run by two of our other members named Dom and Jordan, and they are now carrying out the popular education program. So we just rotate as necessary. Emanine says, do you wish to abolish commodity production? slash the market. Yes, essentials should be decommodified, but abolishing markets for low-level recreational consumer goods restricts freedom and feels authoritarian. I don't know if that would be authoritarian. I'm more worried about practicality in that sense. You know, if people just want to trade stuff, that doesn't seem like a problem, right? I think that the market is more than just people trading stuff. People have traded stuff for like all of history, but that doesn't equal a market. Market is a system by which value is determined by trade, by which currency valuation is attached to its valuation on a market, right? So like a system wherein there's a broader conception of value that determines the value of any one given item. Now you're operating in a market system. But yeah, I don't know if I agree that abolishing those markets would be authoritarian. I mean, people would just get those things, right? Like it seems way better to me to not even have to trade for a thing. I just get a thing. Like that would be way better. It seems to me that it would be authoritarian to force people into a market where they actually have to like trade things to get things, right? Like, wouldn't you rather just get a computer rather than having to give them your car in exchange? Like, I don't quite understand the idea of why that would be authoritarian. The second message, you say, this is an issue I have with late stage communism in general, and I just do not see its justification. Effectively, it is a ban on buying things. Why would you want to buy things if you just get things? I just don't understand what you're saying here. Like, it's not a ban on buying things. I mean, like, you could. I just don't understand why you would. Like, why would you? Like, what would be the point of that? It's like saying that under capitalism we have a ban on slavery. It's authoritarian because now I can't go be a slave if I want to. It's like, why would you want to be a slave? I don't get it. Like, being a worker is better than just being a slave in the traditional sense. Why would you not want to be a worker? And you're like, well, it's authoritarian. You're preventing me from becoming a slave. It's like, okay, yeah, I guess you're right. I don't think that's authoritarian, but you say distribution based on need only feels dystopian, focused on pure utility, bare minimum for survival. If I want a Labubu, I feel like I should be able to. Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, here I think we're expanding the meaning of need, right? Like, obviously, if we have a flourishing society, we're going to be producing way more than what people need. Need here, I think, is like attached to a concept of desire as well. So obviously, we're going to be producing a bunch of things that people would desire. Next, you say ability/need is great for a macroeconomic guiding principle, but literally making that the only principle for the economy, it seems counterintuitive to me. Recreation is an emotional need. Well, then there you have it. Recreation is an emotional need. I think that's a good expansion of the concept here. It's not like, I don't think this word need here is supposed to function like you're understanding it. I think that your last sentence there is the better understanding. Recreation is an emotional need. So is community. So is art. So is those things can be expanded to be understood as needs within the context of community or in a communist society. So I think that's probably, that last sentence is you understanding the better redefinition of this word need within the communist context. Emanine says, on the get a computer, what if I want a specific computer? Okay, well, you could ask them for a specific computer. What if everyone wants one? Hopefully we would scale up production so everyone could get one. Markets for this seem like the only way possible. I don't see why that's the case. I don't understand why that would be the case. Like, all of us right now could have a computer. Why do we need a market for that? Okay, if you want a really good computer, you can have a really good computer. Yeah, that's fine. I don't think there's any issue with you having a really good computer. I'm sure if you want it, you have a purpose for it. You want to play really cool video games. You need to, host a server. Those are all things that are feasible reasons to ask for a really nice computer. Well, I don't see any issue with that. I don't think that what you're describing here is an issue for the system being described. Yeah, pretty much Knowledge and Defense just said. We already live in a post-scarcity society, technically. Artificial scarcity is a distribution problem. Yeah, absolutely. Scotty Too Hottie says, about free will, when it comes to talent and having physical or brain advantageous over people, I don't think they should be rewarded for it because they were born that way, didn't earn it. The point of my comment about free will is that it is morally unjust to reward people with better physical or mental abilities because they didn't earn it. They were just born that way. I actually think that's a pretty good observation. I don't necessarily even disagree with that. That kind of makes sense. I think that when we're talking about people being rewarded insofar as like people being compensated in measure to their labor, generally the reasoning for that, the reward isn't because they've like earned it, quote unquote, but because we're trying to motivate people to work, right? We're trying to motivate people to produce things. I think that's the general conception of why people would argue for that. But I would say that it's not, I don't think it's necessary in a post-scarcity society to only reward people based on the measure of their labor. I don't think that's necessary. So I don't know if I agree with the thing you're critiquing to begin with. I think that that's a good value in a socialist society, but in a society where we have developed from each according to their abilities to each according to their needs, then we wouldn't even be measuring people's productivity. Or if we were measuring it, it would not be the measure by which people were allowed to get things. Now, in a paracon kind of a society, like a participatory economic kind of society, yeah, the people would be rewarded and measured to their labor. And once again, this is a way to make sure that people work and that they're productive, and that therefore people will have things that they need. And so your comment might be a good critique of a paracon. I don't think it's a very good critique of like communism, for example. Imanine says, I feel like I'm almost fully convinced on every aspect of complete late-stage communism. I just need to understand how such distribution problems would be solved. What if everyone needs a really good computer, but we don't have the resources to make them? Well, then we would have to, through a process of deliberation within like the council structures of society, determine how those things are going to be distributed. We would have to determine, we'd have to rank needs, essentially. We would rank why people need them and how crucial those things are. And then we would distribute them based on those things, right? Like, oh, this person needs it because they're running a server that allows websites to stay up. Okay. This other person needs it because they just don't want to wait for a screen to load and it's boring. Yeah, obviously we can say which of those should the computer should go to, right? But yeah, no, I mean, I will say what you're getting at here. I don't want to present what you're saying as if this is a trivial problem. I think this is a recurring problem within the academic literature. And that is planning is difficult. Planning requires a ton of inputs and a ton of outputs, and you have to understand how the economy is moving, where all your resources are, and so on. And what you're saying here is not a trivial question. The answer to your question are entire paradigms of economic thought. So like there's central planning, there's decentral planning. In each of these, there's a bunch of subcategories, ones that kind of half utilize markets, one that use big computers, some like CyberSyn, for example, which use markets and use some planning mechanisms based on inputs and input and output productivity. There's a ton of ways to answer that question. And the way, if you want to learn more about answering that question, I would research like economic planning. And one thing I'll tell you ahead of time is that planning, how to just perfectly plan a society economically, is, I would say, an unsolved question, or a question for which we have not come to like one specific good answer for it. There's a bunch of competing answers, and it's kind of up to you which you think might be the best answer. I think most people are kind of tending towards this idea that computers using algorithms could probably do a really good job at it. At the moment, it's hard to say whether our computers are capable of that, especially that a lot of people think AI is going to be the solution, but right now AI is hallucinating, so clearly not a very good solution. Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of possible answers. I would research Paracon. Research participatory economics. I think it's a good place to start in jogging your thoughts on the matter. Emanine says, I love cybernetics. That's what I would want along with co-ops, but I don't know if it would qualify as an abolition of commodity production, be criticized by Puritans. Yeah, well, I don't think it's like the end goal, but I think what you just described is a good, like, medium-term goal, right? That's probably a good medium-term goal. Bro, you're too good at this. If Jubilee ever offers, please go. Sure, I'd do that. I'd be down with that. I'd be fine. Yeah, there's a bunch of good answers, people engaging with these questions here in the chat. Chat's like really killing it today. Like somebody mentions, given planned obsolescence, we produce vastly more computers than we need. It's just that most of these computers are produced through inefficient capitalist modes that want profit over efficiency. Yeah, absolutely. Precisely. Yeah, we're very post-scarcity for most things. Knowledge and Defense says, yeah, but that's because AI is run by dumbass Elon Musk with opposing class interests. Yeah, I mean, that's true. But AI is hallucinating even without Elon Musk's interventions. It's clearly the technology has some very serious flaws. So I don't know if I would trust it to be doing any kind of economic management at the moment. The most I would trust AI to do is maybe to develop an economic plan, but then we would, like, democratically, everybody would have to approve the plan. Fogg says, machine learning has tremendous potential in scientific research, especially in plant genetics and such. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if AI weren't controlled by huge companies, I think that it would be a much healthier technology. It would still have a lot of flaws, but it would have a lot fewer flaws. And it's already, as you say, being used in a variety of scientific research in a way which is not damaging, but is in fact highly useful. It's actually turned out to be very, very good at detecting cancer, for example. Like a very high success rate as well, right? Like, we're always worried about it hallucinating. No, it's better at spotting cancer than humans are, which, that's phenomenal. So yeah, I'm not like anti-AI in a general sense. I'm anti the way that AI is implemented. I think it's very damaging the way it's being implemented. I also am not a big fan of how much people rely on it. I wish people would rely on it less. I think that that's not good, especially when it hallucinates. How can you trust it? It hallucinates all the time. Like I use it from time to time, just kind of test what it can do. I don't ever really use it for like tasks I need done, but every once in a while I just want to be like, I wonder if it can do this. And I got to be honest, a strong 20% of the time, it just makes shit up. And that's not good. Not good. It definitely needs some strong improvement. Crazy Cool says hallucination is an inherent part of AI. It's how it learns and wouldn't be something you could just get rid of with modern forms of AI. That's interesting. I never really heard that take before. That hallucination is how it learns. That's interesting. Well, I feel like you could get it to not just make things up, right? Couldn't you just get it to not guess? Like, you can tell it to not guess and it'll stop. So, like, surely they could have built it to not guess. I feel like the only reason it guesses is because AIs were trained to be sycophantic, to be suck-ups. And they found that people didn't like when the AI didn't give them an answer. They preferred to just at least have an answer, even if it was wrong. I wonder if it were trained not to be as sycophantic, if it would not hallucinate as much. Give me a sec. I gotta check something. Okay. Here in probably in the next 15 to 30 minutes, I will have to jump off here so that I can get ready to go to the free event tonight. Once again, if any of you are in Tulsa, which I know a surprising number of my viewers are living in Tulsa, you should come to the event for the Forum for Real Economic Emancipation this evening. There will be 3 speakers, Professor Raj Patel, Nico Albert Williams, and Katie Plohocki, the latter two of which are actually here in Tulsa, or live here in Tulsa. That will be at the St. Jerome Parish, 205 West King Street. Doors are at 5:30. The event starts at 6. So, no, not Cash Patel, Raj Patel. It'll be about, the topic of the talk is who controls the food, manufactured hunger, and the fight for food sovereignty. So y'all should come meet me. I'll be there this evening. Eminine says, do you stream often? How often do you stream? I stream once a month. I usually stream on I forgot now, the first Friday of the month. But this first Friday, I literally just forgot. That's the truth. I just forgot. Somebody says, having Cash Patel there would be kind of weird. Yeah, it would be. AV says, so what would be the place of AI in a post-revolutionary society? I don't know. I mean, like, usually I would just answer that question. But I think that the possibilities are going to depend on what it ends up being good at by the time we end up in a revolutionary society. If it didn't hallucinate anymore, then it could be used for a huge number of things. But as long as it's used for hallucination, as long as it hallucinates, we are going to have to be really careful about our use of it. It definitely cannot be making any decisions. It probably functions best as a way to gather information and a way to systematize things that are already happening, to notice patterns perhaps, and to tell us what the patterns are. It can be used one thing I thought that it might be cool if you could have an AI that what it did was checked in with all the people in an organization about the progress on tasks that they were carrying out. You let it sit on meetings, and then it keeps track of who's delegated to do what and keeps track of the time frame. And the AI like reaches out to them from time to time being like, what's your progress on this task? Or you were delegated to do this at this meeting and blah, blah, blah. What is your progress on that task? Then the person answers, and then it keeps that. And then let's say somebody else in the organization is like, I know last week such and such was delegated to do a task. And then they ask the AI, what is that person's progress? And the AI says they are 50% done, right? Like that would be super useful for coordinating people and not having everybody constantly just have to be like, did you do this? Did you do that? Instead, just the AI would be kind of coordinating everything. It would be the middle person between everybody. That could be super helpful. If it did that, if we could have it do it that right now, that'd be great. That'd be phenomenal. It'd be super helpful. Crazy Cool says, you can turn down the guessing, certainly, but it makes AI less flexible. The universality of applications of generative AI that companies put it into means they'll keep it turned up. Yeah, I guess that's a fair perspective. You say you'd still want some guessing so that it could keep adapting. An AI with hallucinations completely turned off would fundamentally not be able to adapt properly to changing conditions, to my understanding. Yeah, that might be true. I don't know. It's possible. I don't know enough to know. I mean, what you're saying makes sense, right? It hallucinates, gets it wrong, you correct it, it says thank you, and puts that in its database, and that's how it learns. It learns from you doing the research. But that's just kind of weird. Why can't it do the research? It's just peculiar. Kyle Kalinske the other day brought up a really weird hallucination that it kept having. He fed it a video of Joe Rogan being interviewed with somebody. And then he asked it, like, what show is Joe Rogan on here? And the thing says, it's the Joe Rogan Experience. And that's not true. He wasn't. He was on the other person's show. And Kyle's like, it says he's on the Joe Rogan Experience and he's talking with, the wrong person. It was like Theo Von or something. And then he's like, that's wrong. That is not Joe Rogan's show. And that is not Theo Von. It's like, you're right. And it makes up another show. And then it says, that's Brendan Schaub. And again, it's not Brendan Schaub. And yeah, it's just weird that it guesses rather than actually looking at the content that he's showing it. I don't quite understand stuff like that. That just seems kind of weird. It seems like it would just apply whatever tools it had in hand. It would be trying to recognize faces. It would be trying to match the set to sets that it has in its database. Not entirely sure why it kept doing that. Those are very weird hallucinations. Just completely making up answers. Eating a Cookie says, it's wrong because Joe Rogan is linked to his show and that's memorized by the model. Yeah, that's almost certainly why that it thought it was the Joe Rogan show. It was like, oh, I recognize that's Joe Rogan. Oh, that sounds like Joe Rogan. It's the Joe Rogan show. It's just weird that after he corrected it, it still, guessed a bunch of wrong stuff afterwards. But anyway. I think kind of what I see a few people talking about is like AI. People could optionally use AI if they wanted to. If they didn't feel like they needed it, they wouldn't have to use it in an anarchistic society. And if they wanted to use it, they could use it. It's probably that's what I think. I don't think it would probably need to be forced onto anybody. Sandy Turkwich says, I've wondered how much better these things would work if they had access to actual libraries and weren't just trained on whatever data is free or cheap legally on the internet. Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. I think they'd probably be so much better if they were trained on wider variety of data. No doubt. I think they would be very powerful. But then again, they're already breaking a bunch of laws, using a bunch of material they're not supposed to use. So, all right. Well, I think I need to call it a day. I enjoyed this live stream. This is a good one. But I need to start getting ready for that event this evening. Once again, if you're in Tulsa, come visit us at Free. I'll be there. You can meet me in person. Also, if you want to support the channel, you should go over to my Patreon. Become a patron for any amount. Patreon.com/c/Anark. Oh, well. Probably should have been saying that all this time. Here you go. I really need it right now. My income from my side job has declined here around the Christmas season. And I haven't released the videos quite as often. So becoming a Patreon or becoming a patron over my Patreon, super, super helpful. Or if you want to use the integrated YouTube version, just go down there and click join where the subscribe button would generally be. It's basically an YouTube Patreon. Lastly, if you want to go and help develop a workers cooperative, a media workers cooperative, essentially a socialist Netflix, you should go over to means.tv and use my affiliate code. If you use my affiliate code, I get a cut of your subscription fee. If you don't use my affiliate code, then I will only get a small cut of total profits for the quarter. So yeah, use my code. You'll also get a discount. That's pretty sweet. And, one of the criticisms a lot of people had of Means TV was that it was almost only authoritarian leftists. That's not true. They've started putting on a lot more anarchists. I'm on there. Prince Shakur is on there. Chill Goblin is now on there. He's also an anarchist. They are working to get a wider diversity of viewpoints on Means TV, and they're doing a pretty good job. So people should go reward them for putting more anarchists on the platform and, help out Means TV. Think that is about it. That's everything that's coming to mind. Appreciate everybody showing up. Y'all have a good one.